Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. There is currently an AFC North coaching shakeup that is now underway. We're going to be breaking down the Ravens firing their head coach, John Harbaugh, and the Browns firing their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, at the top of today's show and what that means for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then we'll get into a report that is now linking Aaron Rodgers to the Minnesota Vikings in 2026. Could he leave Pittsburgh to join forces with Kevin O'Connell? I'll discuss that rumor here coming up in a little bit, and then make sure you guys stick around because I'll finish up today's show by talking about Colin Cowherd's latest lunacy when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers and why Pittsburgh ended up winning the AFC North here in 2025. But before we get into the content today, yesterday we put out our preview for Texans versus Steelers, and I put out a call for our sub battle. Well, guess what? So did Texans, and Jeremy Chuggs has been slandering my name on his channel, and because of that, Texans fans are really riled up. They've gotten 3 more new subscribers than us already this week. Both fan bases are really riled up. We added 288 new subscribers already, so we're just 3 new subscribers behind the Texans. So if you haven't clicked that subscribe button yet, you watch our channel, I'd greatly appreciate it if you click that thumbs up icon so we can beat Jeremy Chuggs. This is a tweet that he put out yesterday. He says, "My coworker, Jack Sperry, is delusional. He truly believes the Steelers are going to beat the Texans this week, ... I broke down why him and Steelers fans' reasons of why they'll win are ridiculous. So if you guys want to beat Jeremy Chuggs this week, make sure you guys click that subscribe button. Let's bury these fools and show them that Steelers Nation is undefeated. All right, so now let's get into the big shakeup that is happening in the AFC North. Obviously, it's been a disappointing year for most of the teams in the AFC North this year, especially the Baltimore Ravens, who were preseason Super Bowl favorites, and most people projected the Steelers to be either third or fourth in the division heading into the year. Of course, they end up being crowned champions, but today the Baltimore Ravens have decided to fire their 18-year, tenured head coach, John Harbaugh, creating an opening in Baltimore at the head coaching position in nearly 2 decades. Of course, Harbaugh was the second longest tenured head coach in the NFL. He just finished his 40th matchup versus Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe, who knows, if Tyler Loop makes that kick, we might be talking about a different story here. Maybe we would be on the receiving end here and Tomlin would be the one that's getting fired. Probably not, but, the Baltimore Ravens decided to pull this trigger, and, they're going to have a head coach there in Baltimore, a new one for the first time in a long time, and Harbaugh is expected to be the number 1 head coaching candidate across the National Football League. It sounds like there's a lot of things connecting him to the New York Giants, but then also the Cleveland Browns have fired their head coach, Kevin Stefanski. The 2-time coach of the year is out in Cleveland, and there will be a new head coach to usher in the next era of Cleveland Brown football, likely with Shadur Sanders and Deshaun Watson coming back into the fold there in 2026. Honestly, don't love that job in Cleveland because I don't love the quarterbacks that Andrew Berry, their GM, is going to want to keep on the roster next year. And frankly, I don't think getting rid of a 2-time coach of the year is going to stabilize that organization. I think the Browns are just going to get worse before it gets better, which is just the way it works in Cleveland. But then the Cincinnati Bengals are actually keeping their head coach Zach Taylor after multiple disappointing seasons in a row. The Brown family has decided to keep Zach Taylor around. Apparently Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, the leadership there in the Bengals locker room decided to really push to keep Taylor, and there was some injuries this year, specifically to Joe Burrow, that really derailed their season early on. And who knows where the Bengals would be right now if Burrow stayed healthy, but their defense is once again terrible. It was one of the worst, if not the worst defenses in the National Football League. And as a Steelers fan, man, I am thrilled that the Bengals decided to keep him on their team. And listen, man, my takeaway from all this is that, Mike Tomlin is that stabilizing force in this division. No matter what happens in this division, different quarterbacks, different head coaches with all these different teams, the one thing that never changes is Mike Tomlin is the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he always finds a way to keep his job, get this team to 10-7 or better, and then make the playoffs, and this year delivering an AFC North championship. So Mike Tomlin continues to be the steady presence in this division. and is a big reason why the Steelers, are never in the basement of the AFC North and are the stabilizing force and the kings of this division. But for me, guys, this couldn't be better for Pittsburgh because, you're getting rid of two pretty darn good coaches within this division. Stefanski's a two-time coach of the year. Harbaugh is a pretty darn good coach in his own right. And now the Browns and Ravens are going to be bringing in new people that are unknown and might not be quite as good. So, Harbaugh's Super Bowl champion. So, there's definitely a big shakeup happening in the AFC North right now. It's going to be interesting to see what those two teams decide to do at head coach this offseason. But coming up here on Steelers Talk is Aaron Rodgers on his way to Minnesota here in 2026. There's a new rumor indicating that Rodgers may be interested in going to Minnesota, and Minnesota might be interested in bringing the then 43-year-old quarterback in for one final season. But before we get into the rest of today's show, guys, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And it is officially the new year here, guys. And in my opinion, this is the best time of the year for watching sports, whether it's bowl games or playoff games, whether it be in collegiate or professional football. Basketball and hockey season is now in full swing as well. It's all happening all at once. It's all happening right now. And while all that action is going on, there's one place where it feels good to be right: Prize Picks. Prize Picks is super simple to play. You just pick more than or less than on at least two player stat projections, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. My favorite feature about Prize Picks is that how you play is up to you. If you want a little bit more flexibility, you can choose the flex play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you're feeling really strong about your lineup and want a bigger payout, you can go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test, make some money. That is, if you know ball. You guys can take a look here at my Prize Picks projection for Monday Night Football wild card weekend here between the Texans and Steelers. I'm taking the less on passing yards for C.J. Stroud, the more on receptions for Kenny Gainwell, and the more on receiving yards for Pat Freiermuth. You guys can download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Now, here we go again, Steelers Nation, with the Minnesota Vikings, Aaron Rodgers rumors, and especially from The Athletic in particular. And instead of Diana Rossini, it's Jeff Howe from The Athletic saying that the Vikings may pursue Aaron Rodgers this offseason, despite the fact that they have a young quarterback that they spent a top 10 draft pick on just a couple years ago in J.J. McCarthy, who didn't have the best season this year. This is what Howe had to say about the connection between Rodgers and the Vikings. He says Rodgers and the Vikings were flirting from across the room last offseason, so there could be some consideration of rekindling those flames, especially if the Vikings want to pause or even halt the J.J. McCarthy experiment. Now, first of all, I don't necessarily think Minnesota was flirting with Rodgers last year. I think a lot of people wanted Rodgers to go to Minnesota because, they had a Super Bowl ready roster and it would have paralleled Brett Favre's career, and, he's friends with Kevin O'Connell, so they made that connection. But according to Rodgers himself, he said it this offseason that, he's friends with Kevin O'Connell, so he would have some conversations with him, but there was no real talks about him going to Minnesota. And, the Vikings were very clear all offseason as well. We're going with J.J. McCarthy. Now, Diana Rossini and Colin Cowherd and all these people just threw speculation against the wall because they wanted it to happen. They wanted to have a story to talk about. But, according to Aaron Rodgers himself, there really wasn't much there, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest on the part of the Minnesota Vikings. However, I do think Aaron potentially had some interest in going to Minnesota last offseason, all right? They did have, on paper, a really good roster heading into the offseason. He is good friends with Kevin O'Connell. They do play in the NFC North, where he would get to play the Bears twice and the Packers twice. That would be definitely an interesting situation, and I think, he would have loved to go to L.A. To play for the Rams and Sean McVay. I think he would have liked to play in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. But, apparently that just wasn't something Minnesota was interested in this offseason, and Rodgers ends up, falling in love with Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, and he ends up signing here, and the rest is history. But if Minnesota does come calling here this offseason, like apparently they didn't last year, could Rodgers pick up that phone? Because I think if this offseason he had a choice between Minnesota and Pittsburgh, and those two teams were equally interested in Rodgers, I think he probably picks Minnesota. All right, but Minnesota wasn't interested in him, so he ends up coming to Pittsburgh. If the same choice is there in front of him this year, is he going to pick Minnesota over Pittsburgh? again, or is he going to come back to Pittsburgh? For me, I think anything's possible, but I think now that Aaron is here in Pittsburgh and he's embedded in this organization and in this locker room, my guess is if he returns in 2026, and it sounds like he's certainly maybe leaning that direction, I think he would return to Pittsburgh before going to another new organization, his third team in 3 years at 43 years old, and go play for the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a few reasons for that. The first reason is he has a special connection with head coach Mike Tomlin, and Rodgers has said this a number of times, from his first, media availability here in Pittsburgh to, his last press conference after we won the AFC North Championship last Sunday. Whenever he's asked, why did you come to Pittsburgh? I came here because of Mike Tomlin, and he has been so complimentary of Coach T all season long. I don't know if that's a relationship where, Rodgers is going to be like, well, Kevin O'Connell's calling me now. Sorry, Mike. See you later. I just don't think that, Aaron is the type of guy to do that. I think that he's somebody that really cherishes his relationships with people. I think he really cherishes his relationship with Coach T in particular. So I think he feels a little bit of loyalty to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Mike Tomlin. Second of all, I think a second year of continuity in this offense, is important to him. And he's talked about this in the past, how, in the first year of an offense, you're just getting to know the offense and the players and building chemistry. And then the second year is really the year where you can take off. This is what Rodgers had to say about second year continuity and why he's thinking about what it could look like in a second year here in Pittsburgh. He says, anytime you're in a first year offense, there's always some growing pains in the offense. So it's like you feel like if you had another year, what could you do? I look at 2019, the first year with Matt LaFleur, and the way I played in 2019, and then kind of the adjustments we made in the offseason, and then the way I played in 2020, which was just kind of in a whole other level. I think a lot of that is just familiarity with the offense and the guys. And we've done the best we could with our conversations and our meeting time in Pittsburgh this year, outside the facility, and our meeting time and inside the facility. Obviously, the more years you get in a system with the same guys, the more continuity you have, the better you feel you can play. So if Rodgers goes to Minnesota, obviously he has to build up that connection and that chemistry and that continuity in one season again, whereas in Pittsburgh, he'd be in the same offense with the same coordinator, with a lot of the same weapons and the pieces and the O-line and all that different stuff. And also just in terms of style and what KOC, the head coach there in Minnesota, likes to do, he likes to run a pure progression offense, lots of under center. That is not an Aaron Rodgers friendly offense. Rodgers likes to be in shotgun. He likes to have a lot of freedom at the line of scrimmage and to call audibles and see things in the defense. But like KOC wants a quarterback to go up there, read the defense post snap and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rodgers wants to be more of a pre-snap processor, whereas KOC wants his quarterbacks to be post-snap processors. So there's a little bit of a rift there. So if he goes to Minnesota, what exactly is the offense going to look like? But now, in terms of what we can expect from Rodgers in terms of free agency next year, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler says that Pittsburgh may have to wait, quote-unquote, months for an answer as to whether or not Rodgers wants to play in 2026. And, that bears the question, do the Pittsburgh Steelers really want to do this again and wait as long as they waited this year to sign Aaron Rodgers? This is what Fowler had to say this week. He says, if the Steelers fail to make the playoffs, does Rodgers say, I'm going to go? We do shows all offseason, so we know that we're not going to get clarity right after the game on what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. It's going to be months probably, so we'll see what happens. Now, I really don't know if this is the case. I feel like people assume because last year Aaron Rodgers took a long time to quote-unquote decide to sign with the Steelers that he's going to do it again. And do we really know that for sure? I think last offseason was kind of a unique circumstance for Aaron Rodgers in his personal life. And I think everybody just kind of assumes that, Rodgers purposefully, held the Steelers on the line for multiple months when in reality, he was dealing with, multiple people in his life that were dealing with cancer and they were fighting that really deadly disease, and he didn't want to commit to a football team if it meant that him taking care of his people would bleed into the season and he wasn't going to be able to fully commit to the team. I think he decided to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers actually pretty early on, probably right after he visited Pittsburgh, just a couple weeks into free agency. I think he decided right there and right then, if I'm playing this year, it's going to be for Pittsburgh, but I got to make sure my people start fighting off this disease jerseys and you get some positive signs before I really buy in and I really sign that dotted line and I make that commitment. And that's why it took as long as it did. Going into this offseason, though, hopefully, anyways, he's not going to have to deal with those same things. And he's not going to have to take care of his people the same way he did last offseason. And honestly, man, I bet he makes a decision much faster this offseason, all right? I think we'll probably have an answer on Aaron Rodgers of whether or not he's going to come back and play for the Steelers or whether he is going to retire by free agency. All right, I think we'll have that answer by the time that free agency opens. We're not going to have to wait months. We're not going to have to wait, until June or, right before mandatory minicamp. I don't think that's the case. I think we're going to get an answer from Aaron Rodgers a lot sooner than people think. And my guess is he will come back in 2026. I think, honestly, right now, the only way that I could see, the chances of Rodgers retiring being greater than him coming back is if the Steelers win the Super Bowl. Because if the Steelers win the Super Bowl and Santa Clara, where, the area where he grew up, in the 49ers stadium, and, who knows who they'd be playing. Maybe they play the Packers, maybe they play the Bears. Who knows what the matchup would look like. If we win the Super Bowl this year, I think Rodgers is done, okay? But if we come up short, this is a team that made the playoffs this year in his first year, and we already know Rodgers is curious as to what things will look like in a potential second year here in Pittsburgh. So I think, double-digit win season in year one, maybe we can get to 12 or 13 wins in year two. I think that will be his thinking. Plus, it's Cam Hayward's final year of his career next year. I think Cam's going to want Rodgers to come back. Unless Rodgers gets massively injured or we win the Super Bowl, I think Rodgers likely is back with the Steelers next year. So predict it for me down there in the comment section. Will Aaron Rodgers be back on the Steelers next season? Simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. I think he will be. Let me know your guys' thoughts are down there in the comments. We'll finish up today's News and Rumors edition of Steelers Talk by talking about Colin Cowherd, our favorite clown that knows nothing about the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he says and he claims Aaron Rodgers was the one that carried the Pittsburgh Steelers to a division title in 2025, saying that he's the only thing the Steelers do well. In fact, Colin even said that Aaron Rodgers should win Comeback Player of the Year this year. Now, with the old rules of Comeback Player of the Year, I would agree. He's had a pretty darn good season after everyone kind of, casted him away. But with the new rules, you have to be coming off an injury, and Rodgers played all 17 games with the Jets last year, so he's not eligible to win the award. But this is what Colin Cowherd had to say about Rodgers and how he apparently carried the Steelers this year. He said, all year long on Pittsburgh, I kept going back to this well. I kept saying they don't do anything I like except Aaron Rodgers. At 42 years old, was the only thing every Sunday I was like, yeah, I trust Aaron. He hasn't thrown a pick since what, November? And the Steelers have a lead versus Baltimore. They blow two coverages. Zay Flowers is open multiple times, allowing 7.5 yards per play. Lamar Jackson, fourth quarter, up and down the field. And the other thing is, nobody gets open with the Steelers. You notice this? Aaron Rodgers' second half of the season with no DK Metcalf the last 2 weeks, 73% completion percentage, passer rating well over 100. PFF has the Steelers receiving core at number 29. That was rated with the season with DK Metcalf. It's 32nd without him. And here's Aaron, who doesn't run much anymore in a dysfunctional offense that really hasn't run the ball consistently for 7 years, an offensive line that has been okay and inconsistent for 7 years in pass protection, and he pulls it all together. Now, in terms of Colin and, saying that Aaron is pulling it all together and he's carrying this team, all this different stuff, where I think he's right is that he was outstanding in the second half, not only of the season this year for the most part, but also in the second half versus the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, he had an over 130 passer rating in the fourth quarter against the Ravens on Sunday. He had that huge touchdown, obviously, to seal it. 2 straight touchdown drives conducted by him and multiple third and long conversions. I completely agree with that part of it. But where I think Colin is way wrong is that, his claim that Pittsburgh apparently doesn't do anything else well outside of Aaron Rodgers. That is just a complete farce to me. And it just shows that he doesn't watch the Pittsburgh Steelers. He doesn't, take a particularly hard look at where the Steelers rank in a lot of these key metrics. Let's start with the run game. I mean, this is a top 10 run game in the National Football League this year in terms of efficiency. They're 7th in EPA per rush, and they're 6th in rushing success rate this year. So this is a top 10 run game led by one of the better running back duos in football in Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell. I mean, Colin's been one of the leaders of this narrative that the Steelers can't run the football. He said it on a number of occasions. That just tells me he doesn't watch the Steelers, because the Steelers can clearly run the football. And then also, he said the offensive line isn't very good. The PFF, who he quoted here in his own segment here about the wide receiver core, they ranked the Pittsburgh Steelers in the top 10 among offensive lines in the National Football League. So the same outlet that he's using as a source for his wide receiver rankings, but then he'll turn around and say, oh, the O-line sucks. No, this is actually one of the better young O-lines in football. And also, Pittsburgh has the lowest pressure rate in the National Football League. And that's in conjunction with Aaron Rodgers getting the ball out quickly and the offensive line holding up as well as they have this year. So they do that well. Then we look at defense. And listen, man, the defense isn't perfect, but they do things well. They take the football away at a top 5 clip, 27 takeaways this year, and they're also top 10 in sacks. They're also top 5 in pressure rate. So they can get after the quarterback. They can take the football away. They can run the football. They have a good O-line. Like, you're just stacking things up. And then also they can cover with their cornerbacks. All right, you look at the PFSN cornerback impact metric. The top 2 guys in the entire National Football League in this metric are on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Joey Porter Jr., who has been locked down all season long, and James Pierre, who has been a revelation for Pittsburgh this year, are the top 2 guys in football, and that's over guys like Quinyon Mitchell and Pat Surtain and Sauce Gardner. Okay, so the Steelers, they can cover, they can get after the quarterback, they can take the football away, they can run the football, and yes, Aaron Rodgers can do some really good things with his arm as well. But Colin Cowherd is just a clown for saying that Rodgers is the only thing that this team can do right. So if you agree with me and you disagree with Colin and you think that he's an absolute clown for having the take that he just gave, click that thumbs up icon if you haven't already. We greatly appreciate your guys' support. That'll be it for today's News and Rumors edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. I know today was a little bit of a longer one. We had some interesting topics to talk about today, but type those real ones down there in the comment section if you made it to the end of today's show. I know today was a little bit of a longer one, but if you made it to the end, that makes you a real one. I want to know who the real ones are down there in the comments. So type those real ones and make sure you guys click that subscribe button to help us beat Texans today in our new subscriber battle. We have in-depth Steelers content like this every single day on this channel. So if you guys want to help us beat the Texans off the field before the Steelers beat them on the field on Monday night, click that subscribe button. Until next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.